Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is a Thursday edition of the Utopia Football Podcast. I'm Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610, and the host of this here podcast. Great to be with you as we record on a Thursday afternoon, whenever or wherever you are listening to this. I certainly appreciate it. We certainly appreciate it here at Odyssey and Sports Radio 610 as the Texans are winding down mandatory minicamp. The media got their last look at the Texans pre-training camp yesterday on Wednesday. So we've got some reports from there that we're going to get to on the episode today. We've got some mini camp and OTA superlatives that I'm going to be handing out. Maybe I'll just call them the Pendies awards for 4 different Texans during mini camp and OTAs that I got to watch a few times, but certainly reports that we heard and then rumblings from inside the building that these particular players have looked really good and are fulfilling some of their promise. We'll get to those in just a second. I've got some thoughts on CJ Stroud and the rounds that he's been making. I say the rounds he's been making. It's really been one podcast that he did that has grown legs like no other podcast I've ever seen for like the last week or so. It feels like there's a different topic every day that's made the national rounds from that podcast that CJ and Tank Dell did with Wallow and Gilly the King. So I'll get to some of my thoughts on that. And then I'm planting my flag, the first media member that I know of in Houston to make a 53-man roster prediction. So you're going to bookmark this episode, you're going to save it, and then at the end of training camp when they make final cuts, we'll see how close I was. It's strange. As I was making the cut downs, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit, it feels like there had been Texan teams that are much worse than this one, way worse than this one, that have been easier to come up with a 53-man roster than this one. And I think that's indicative of just how competitive some of these spots are. I don't know that there's necessarily a correlation to the number of stone cold locks to make a roster and the quality of the roster. You know what I mean? It's possible to have a really, really great team. As long as the guys that are locks are really good players, then you're going to have a really good team. I don't think I'm discovering plutonium or anything by saying that. Anyways, I said all that to say, I will give you in the most podcast-friendly way possible my first 53-man roster prediction. Before we get into that, a quick reminder to subscribe, rate, and review, the 3 magic words. If you are listening or watching this podcast, if you're watching on YouTube or listening wherever it is you listen to your podcast, be sure to subscribe. That just makes it easier. You get the podcast wherever it is you listen to your podcast. And then when you give us a rating, 5-star review, if indeed you like it that much, any sort of rating or review is always helpful in this format. So subscribe, rate, and review. And then another quick reminder, as you're listening to this podcast, if I say something that jogs your creative gene or a question that you may have, right down below there on the screen, houmailbag@gmail.com. You can send that. I do a mailbag episode every Tuesday. So thoughts, questions, comments, especially heading into these summer months. Astros are fair game on there as well, especially this time of year in the mailbag. Anything general NFL and obviously anything Texans, houmailbag@gmail.com. So let's get right into it. I'm going to start with CJ Stroud, actually. So CJ Stroud and the numerous takes that he had on the $1 million worth of game podcast with Wallow and with Gilly the King. He had a lot of interesting thoughts on there. He was doing top 5s, quarterback, in which he was number 3, which is I have no problem with. That's fine. Tend to agree with it, actually, that he's a top 5 quarterback. Thoughts on the Indianapolis Colts and the amount of trash they talk. Probably some more kind of real hard-hitting stuff when it comes to CJ and his father, who's incarcerated right now, who it sounds like CJ kind of alluded to maybe getting out sooner rather than later. So we'll see about that. But the biggest things that were making the rounds with CJ were the comments that were at least tangentially, if not directly tied to Aaron Rodgers. 2 things, really. The one question where CJ was asked, whose career would you rather have, Eli Manning's or Aaron Rodgers? And, of course, the implication there is that Eli had more rings, 2 Super Bowl championships, but clearly the lesser of the 2 quarterbacks from both a talent and a productivity standpoint on the aggregate, including regular season, playoff appearances, MVPs, Pro Bowls, everything. Aaron Rodgers is light years ahead of Eli Manning in every category except Super Bowl rings, where Aaron Rodgers does have 1 and Eli has 2. Me personally, my opinion, the fact that Aaron Rodgers has a Super Bowl ring makes this a really, really easy opinion, either as to who I would want to be personally or who I would want to root for, which quarterback would be more fun to root for. I know two parades are better than one, but I'm guessing that the experience from, say, 2005 through 2022, that the overall experience of being a Packer fan during the Aaron Rodgers era was better than the experience of being a Giant fan during the Eli Manning era, even with the two Super Bowls versus the one. Those are really the only two seasons where the Giants were relevant. I know they made the playoffs in other seasons or whatever, but the only two times that they made deep runs in the postseason and were relevant, they closed the deal and won the Super Bowl, and credit to Eli for that. But I would rather, if I were a quarterback, I would rather have Aaron Rodgers' career. If I were a fan, which is a much more relatable thing, which I am of the Texans, I would rather CJ Stroud's career mirror Aaron Rodgers as opposed to Eli Manning. The fact of the matter is that they both pretty much finished up winning Super Bowls by the time 2011 rolled around. Eli had 2007 and 2011. Aaron Rodgers had 2010, and then numerous other deep runs into the postseason, and obviously 4 MVP seasons as well as the Packers quarterback. It just seems to me like there was a whole lot more fun had probably by Packer fans during Aaron Rodgers' career than there was by Giant fans during Eli Manning's career. So that would be my answer. I didn't view that necessarily as a slight towards Aaron Rodgers. By the way, CJ said he would rather have Eli's career, that Eli, he would rather have the 2 rings instead of the 1. I believe in CJ Stroud being honest in that moment. I also feel like if you sat down and went through the entirety of the accomplishments and the fact that Aaron Rodgers is a no-brainer Hall of Famer and Eli Manning is borderline at best Hall of Fame. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer at all, but some do. I think CJ might reassess that. Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't think that's a slight to Aaron Rodgers. I don't think choosing one career path over the other is a slight. It's not like he's saying Aaron Rodgers sucked. I thought the more, I guess, controversial, disrespectful, maybe, certainly Aaron Rodgers will construe it as disrespect, was when CJ started talking about how much he loves watching Matthew Stafford play quarterback, the Rams quarterback, how much he loves watching him play, how much he patterns some of the no-look throws and some of the things Matthew Stafford can do, that he feels like if Matthew Stafford were plunked down into Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers' situation, that he would have won 3 or 4, might have won 3 or 4 Super Bowls. That, to me, is the one where if I'm Aaron Rodgers and I'm looking to put a chip onto my shoulder, that would be the one to me where, okay, so basically what you're saying is I am a third the quarterback that Matthew Stafford is when it comes to the ability to win, to do the most important thing that CJ thinks, and that's win rings. That Matthew Stafford, and by the way, I disagree with CJ on this take that Matthew Stafford would be a 3 or 4 ring quarterback in Green Bay. I think it ignores Matthew Stafford's culpability in Detroit not being all that great during Matthew Stafford's time there. I'm not here to say that Detroit was remotely close to being well run during Matthew Stafford's time there, but there were times where they did spike a little bit. He did make the playoffs 3 times and never won a playoff game. Win a playoff game, and then I'm a little more sympathetic to you. So I actually disagree with both of CJ's takes here. The one that you should take Eli's career over Aaron Rodgers. And I also disagree that if you put Matthew Stafford in Aaron Rodgers' shoes in Green Bay, that Stafford would have won multiple Super Bowls. I don't think that's the case. I do think that Aaron Rodgers is the type that is going to take what CJ said and somehow tuck it away. I, for one, am very anxious to see Aaron Rodgers if and when he starts appearing on the Pat McAfee show. This is going to come up because Pat McAfee is pretty good at storing things like that away. CJ Stroud is a friend of the McAfee program as well. So Pat McAfee would probably like nothing better than for his show to be the battleground for these two quarterbacks to get into whatever verbal jousting. I don't think CJ wants it to go there to where it's a him versus Rodgers thing where they're sniping back and forth. I think CJ, when he gets into these situations, is like a lot of guys, very comfortable in a podcast setting, very honest with his answers. And at his core, he is a hyper football nerd, a hyper nerd. Like huge nerdy football, loves the barbershop and the barroom discussions about who's the best, who's this, who's that, top 5 this, power rank these guys. He's got thoughts on all of that. And I think there's a lot of basis in his thoughts. But I also think these are things that are going to I don't know if they're going to get him in trouble necessarily, but they're going to certainly garner a lot of attention. I'm actually anxious. My intent, we have Nick Caserio coming on Payne and Pendergast on Friday morning. My intent is to ask him about these CJ Stroud comments and the traction that they're getting. And as a general manager, how do you look at that, especially given the difficulty of the upcoming schedule? Because there are 3 teams now that CJ has directly said things about that I think that has gotten their attention. At the very least, 2 of them I think are going to get attention, and that would be the Colts, who we already know that the linebackers on that team want to murder CJ, apparently because he talked trash to Zaire Franklin at the Super Bowl, even though CJ says he doesn't remember it. And then I think Aaron Rodgers is going to, I think this is something that he's going to, maybe in the most Aaron Rodgers passive-aggressive way, but still tuck away and use for fuel. And then the third team would be Dallas. And I'm not just talking about CJ Stroud and Micah Parsons going at each other. It feels like CJ, when the Cowboys come up, has things to say about Cowboy fans of the team, saying, yeah, of course you're a Dallas Cowboy, you're delusional, that kind of thing. So there's at least 3 teams that CJ has talked directly about this offseason that are on the Texans schedule. And the Colts they play twice. So that's really 4 games out of 17 with still a lot more time between now and the beginning of the season. So I think a lot of it had to do with the setting that he was in and being on that podcast. I don't have a big issue with it, honestly. If how your opponent reacts to words from your quarterback is something that tips the scales of your season, then you are not built to win a Super Bowl to begin with. That's how I feel about it. Like, I don't feel like if this is something that it has a significant effect on the Texans season, then something is wrong with this football team. And I also think CJ Stroud is among the few who could back up these words. So and look, from the standpoint of what I do, I just spent 11 minutes talking about it on a podcast. We've spent segments and segments talking about it on Sports Radio 610 on our show and other shows. I would be stupid as a host of a podcast and a radio show to tell CJ to stop talking. This is incredible content. So keep on talking, CJ. Even as a Texan fan, I'm not that worried about it. So that's CJ Stroud. The Texans wrapped up mandatory minicamp on we don't want to do 53-man roster projection yet. We want to do superlatives. There we go. Texan minicamp superlatives. They wrapped up minicamp, I think today. The media got to see Tuesday and Wednesday this week. I don't know if they practiced today or not. I saw Nick Caserio was on the golf course today in the Live Pro-Am. I don't know if that was today or yesterday. I know tomorrow he will be on Payne and Pendergast at 7:30. There will be no golf clubs in that studio. Either way, minicamp has now wrapped up. And I think there were a handful of players that we were looking to get eyes on who I think have fulfilled some of the things that we were hoping for, have discussed, and that the players and the coaches themselves have discussed. I've got 4 Texan minicamp superlatives that I want to hand down here. And the first one is to Stefon Diggs, who was under a lot of scrutiny coming in. The trade for Diggs, despite the fact that he's been a great player. Taking a sip of my drink here. Despite the fact that he's been a great player for Buffalo, Texan fans seem to be very split on this trade. Whether they thought it'd be a better idea to keep the cap space in the second-round pick next year, or whether they're just worried about, hey, yeah, the trade makes sense from a value standpoint, but boy, Diggs sure does make me nervous as to how we saw things end in Minnesota and Buffalo. So far, so good with Stefon Diggs. Every teammate, some unprompted, some asked directly about him, have said what a good teammate he's been so far, what a great leader he's been. Tank Dell's calling him his big brother. He's given tips to the younger receivers. And most importantly, he's been getting open in practice. He looks really good. He looks really spry. So the Stefon Diggs situation has worked out just fine so far. So I'm giving him the superlative of best presumed diva reformed on the Houston Texans. I have not seen any diva tendencies yet. He was even asked about it, and he said he doesn't really care what people say about him when it comes to the diva tendencies. So Stefon Diggs, a pendy for you. Second one, John Mechie III. We've heard John Mechie discussed by CJ Stroud at Stroud's press conference when the spring program began back on April the 15th. CJ was asked about some of his teammates in that wide receiver room, and he brought up Mechie's name unprompted twice. Then when asked directly about Mechie, talked about how incredible he looks. Tank Dell talked about how explosive Mechie's look. Anybody asked about Mechie, it's been discussed as if he's made a big jump since the end of last season to now, to where he looks like the guy that warranted a trade up and selection at number 44 overall in the 2022 draft. I can tell you from having been to a couple practices and then seen video from other practices I've been unable to attend, that John Mechie definitely looks different. Maybe not physically looks like stature-wise different, but he looks different moving. He looks more explosive. He looks more precise. He looks like he's getting in and out of his cuts faster. So a receiver room that already had the best three-man rotation in the sport with Diggs and Nico and Tank Dell may have a fourth guy there that if any of those first three guys go down, I'm not going to say you stick John Mechie in for, say, Stephon Diggs and you don't miss a beat, but at least you've got a guy who potentially is above a replacement level, above average wide receiver when he comes in and can make some plays for you. So Mechie has looked really good. He's lived up to some of the hype that we've heard from others in camp. So to Mechie, I give the comeback player of Texans minicamp Pendy Award. Good job, John Mechie. All right, two more. Kamari Lassiter, come on down. You are the next contestant in cornerback opposite Derek Stingley. And kidding aside, he has been. Kamari Lassiter's been getting a lot of run at that cornerback 2 position. The presumption when he was drafted was that if he was going to get on the field as a young player, it was going to be as a slot corner, as a nickel corner. There is a ton of confidence in Kamari Lassiter from D'Amico Ryans, from his teammates. Will Anderson was gushing about Kamari Lassiter yesterday at his press conference. And the knock on Kamari Lassiter had been speed, that the reason he fell to 42 overall, despite being a cornerback from Georgia who played well in the SEC, was that, well, his 40 time was 4.65 or whatever it was, a slower 40 time than you see from elite corners. We always hear about how there's stopwatch time and there's football time with some guys. Kamari Lassiter's stopwatch time may be subpar for what you're looking for out of a top flight corner. His football speed looks just fine. He was in the hip pocket of a bunch of wide receivers in this mini camp. He made plays on Stephon Diggs, running stride for stride with Tank Dell. He's put himself in a place where I think D'Amico Ryans really wants him. It feels like he wants him to win this competition, to be that second cornerback. Kamari Lassiter. Will Anderson even said that Kamari in practice yesterday won the Swarm Player of the Day award, the prestigious Swarm Player of the Day award. So my pendy for Kamari Lassiter is there isn't one, because I can't put one together that's more prestigious than the Swarm Player of the Day award. I can't top that. I want to win the Swarm Media Member, Swarm Host of the Day award someday. And I want D'Amico Ryans to hand it to me. Kamari Lassiter's look really good. Texan fans got to feel good about that pick at 42. And if he turns into a really good player, then it minimizes, I think, whatever damage you feel might have been caused. Any of you Diggs non-truthers, you Diggs trade skeptics, if Kamari Lassiter at 42 winds up being a starting caliber cornerback on a good defense, then it cushions whatever blow you might have felt from the Diggs trade, because the pick they gave up in the Diggs trade was the one that they got from Minnesota for moving 23 back down to 42. If Kamari Lassiter turns into a player whose production is in line with the 23rd overall pick or better in a draft, then the trade, it improves the level of the deal. By definition, it does. So, I mean, obviously Diggs needs to hold up his part, but I think if you're worried about giving up the second round pick, the only reason that second round pick existed was because the Texans moved back in the draft. They still have their own second round pick next year. So it's not like the Diggs trade put a hole in their draft. You know, it was an extra pick that they got for moving back in this draft. So if they get a player that's a first round player in the second round, to me, it's almost like they're getting Diggs for free. That's how I choose to look at it. Of course, I'm a Diggs trade truther. So anyways, Kamari Lassiter, you get a pendy, you get a future pendy is what you get, like the future second round pick that the Texans got for trading back and getting you. Last one, Kenyon Green. We'll see what it looks like for Kenyon Green on the field when pads go on. You know, is he a guy who can finally block to the level, pass protect to the level that the Texans thought he could when they drafted him with the 15th overall pick? We didn't see anything in these mini camps that really gave us a glimpse into how that looks. The only thing that we did see was how Kenyon Green is moving and how he's transformed his body. And for both of those things, really, really good, especially the physical, the physique, the look, off the charts improvement there. He's put the time in clearly. He took the season off to get healthy. That season he took off, he clearly took very seriously. The proof is there. The proof is in the visual. I don't think you can get to looking how Kenyon Green looks now and it somehow be fake in any way. Like that there's still dietary issues or nutritional issues, but oh my God, look, poof, he's looks better physically. By all accounts, this is a total effort by Kenyon Green. And as a result, he's moving really well. He looks really good. I had written Kenyon Green off. I've said it on this podcast and on Payne and Pendergast multiple times. Psychologically and mentally as a fan, it was the healthy thing for me to do, which is to go, I just need to assume they are not going to get anything out of Kenyon Green. And if he comes back and plays average, honestly, like at this point, if Kenyon Green is an average left guard, I'll take that. I don't know that warrants giving him his fifth-year option, which they have to decide on after this coming season. I don't know if that warrants an extension. If it did, and it's an extension where the value makes sense, I'm not saying give him Quentin Nelson money, but he doesn't deserve it. But if he becomes an average left guard for you over the life of the remainder of his rookie deal, then that is a huge, huge rescue job right there by the Texans and by Kenyon himself. So Kenyon Green, I'm going to give you one of the old school high school superlatives. These other ones are just ones I'm making up on the fly. So I'm going to give you the Pendy for best body and build. It's crazy that we had that back in high school. Like that do they still do that? If you're in high school or you have kids who are in high school, do they still give out superlatives for best body? That feels like something to me that we've lost along the way, if I had to guess. But back in the 80s, man, oh yeah, you could give out best body and not even blink about it, man. Bring back the 80s. All right, so those are my Dundies, my Pendies. Diggs, Mechie, Lassiter, Green. Congratulations, guys. Now, 53-man roster projection. No one's done one yet that I know of in the marketplace. So I am planting my flag right here on this podcast and on the Houston Press, where I write every single day. I am going to give you my 53-man roster projection. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to go by position here, okay? So be listening. If you want to get out a pen right now and jot it down while we're going along with this thing here, you want to play along with me. But this is based on me going to 4 different practices between rookie camp, OTAs, and minicamp. Several videos that I've seen from people I respect on social media. Word of mouth from inside the building and at practice. And general smoke out there in the marketplace. And my brain from what I've seen from these players before. But this is my 53-man roster projection. I will start with quarterback. 3 quarterbacks make this team. CJ Stroud, Davis Mills, Case Keenum. I think the only thing that would prevent it from being those 3 guys would be 1, injury, obviously, and 2, if there was another team that had an injury and another team was willing to give up maybe value plus 25% for either Davis Mills or Case Keenum. I think Mills is probably the one. I don't know. Mills is in the last year of his deal. I mean, they're both free agents after this year. I don't want to go too deep on which backup quarterback would fetch more on the open market. Davis has more physical tools and talent. Case has been around longer and won games and been a starter in the league. So I don't know which one would be more likely to get moved. I don't think either are likely to get moved, but that would be the only thing. But as of right now, I'm calling it 3 quarterbacks, Stroud, Mills, Keenum. All right, so we're down to 50 players. Let's do the running back position here. I think Joe Mixon is a lock, and I think Dameon Pierce is a lock too. And if you'd asked me a month and a half ago, I wouldn't have thought Dameon is a lock. I thought there was a time this offseason where, depending on what the Texans did in the draft and in free agency, that Dameon Pierce's job would be in jeopardy. I'm kind of out of that mode now with Pierce. I think he's making the team. I don't think they're trading him, and I think they're counting on him to be the backup running back at this point. Now, Jawar Jordan, who they drafted in the 6th round, an older player coming out of college. He's 24, but I like his game a lot. And then Dario Gumbawale, I think, is going to make the team as well. I'm listing him as a running back But I think on the strength of his play on special teams and the fact that we saw last year, emergency kicker, the emergency kicker thing could be a tongue-in-cheek joke about like, hey, you may need to kick a field goal again. But I think with this new kickoff rule, there could be a chance that Daria Gumbawale sees the field as a kicker on kickoff team. We've already heard about the Kansas City Chiefs thinking of using Justin Reed in that capacity. And the kickoff rules have changed now. It's not super podcast friendly to explain if you're not familiar with the new kickoff rules, but just know that a lot of the blocking and tackling is taking place in a much more confined area, deep in the return team's territory. It's going to look very, very different. There's not long running starts that guys are getting. And as a result, the expectation is that the kicker is going to be more involved in tackling. They've been playing with this style of kickoff in the XFL, and kickers have been way more involved in tackling. So the logic would be that if we can get somebody to kick who can kick, like a normal kicker on kickoffs, but also be potentially a tackler, then it may make sense to use them in that capacity. Daria Gumbawale could fit that. Justin Reed fits it to a T because he actually tackles in his regular job as safety. So I say all that to say I've got 4 running backs on the team: Mixon, Pierce, Ogunbowale, and Jawar Jordan. So 4 running backs brings us down to 46. Let's throw Andrew Beck in there as well as the fullback, although he is a very, very bubble guy. He's a bubbly guy right now to me. Beck is. Because you've got Ben Skoranek on the team who can play some fullback. We saw them use Brevin Jordan in kind of an H-back capacity last year. I think the team wants a traditional or as close to a traditional fullback as Beck might be on the team. So I've got Beck making the team as well. So 3 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, a fullback. We're down to 45 players left to fill this roster. Tight end, I've got 3 tight ends. This is pretty easy for me. I've got Dalton Schultz. I've got Cade Stover as locks to make the team. And I've got Brevin Jordan for pretty close to a lock to make the team. D'Amico Ryans actually said in his press conference yesterday that Brevin Jordan's been making a ton of plays in practice. They like to do a thing, I guess, when they're doing film, when practice is over, they start the next day by showing film of some of the highlights of the previous day's practice. And apparently Brevin Jordan's been showing up a lot in the film part of stuff, where D'Amico shows highlights. He said that Brevin Jordan is a dude and that he's popping up there all the time. So I'm going to give an impromptu pendy to Brevin Jordan for best actor in a miniseries of football highlights. And it's not even really acting. I know that's going to be tough to fit on an engraving plate on a trophy, but I'll worry about that when there's an actual trophy for a pendy as opposed to me just saying it. But I think Brevin Jordan, Dalton Schultz, Cade Stover, Tegan Catoriano is a bubble guy who gets cut for me. He just can't stay healthy. And so I don't have him making the team as of right now. So we are now down to 42 roster spots to fill. Let's do wide receiver. Wide receiver. Locks to make the team: Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. Supreme locks to make this team. John Mechie is now as close to a lock, not a full lock, but close to a lock. I think Ben Skoranek makes this team, and I list him as a wide receiver / fullback. I know they didn't trade a ton to get him. I know they just did one of those late round pick swaps, but when you make a move to go get anybody, there's clearly, I think, something they may have in mind with him, like certain gadgets and packages that they might have that he could be involved in. So I think he's going to make the team based on that. And then to me, it came down to Noah Brown or Xavier Hutchinson. I still think Robert Woods is going to get cut, even though from what I've heard, he's at a pretty good camp. So it came down to Noah Brown and Xavier Hutchinson, and I think they keep Noah Brown, even though he's banged up now in camp. Like, he didn't do much, if anything, at minicamp. But when he was on the field last year, he was just so productive. I mean, Xavier Hutchinson didn't come close to having games like Noah Brown did. A lot of guys didn't. 150 yards one week, 170 another week, had the game-winning touchdown or the game-tying touchdown, I guess, against Tennessee in Week 15. Noah Brown, when he got on the field, did some really good things. So I've got him making it as the 6th wide receiver over Xavier Hutchinson, who I think they might be able to sneak through and get on the practice squad, and Robert Woods, who I think at this point gets cut. So 6 receivers on the 53-man. That would be Nico, Tank, Diggs, Mechie, Noah Brown, Skoranek. All right, so we're down to 36 spots to fill now. Let's do the offensive line. I'll rattle through these fairly quickly. The offensive line. I've got 10 offensive linemen making it, maybe 9. No, 10. Yeah, 10. The starting offensive line, I think, is going to be Tunsil, Kenyon Green, Juice Scruggs, Shaq Mason, Titus Howard. I think Blake Fisher is a lock to make the team in addition to those 5 since he was a second-round pick. I think Jared Patterson is a lock to make the team given the fact that he gave them good snaps at center last year, and he is a very versatile interior and last season productive blocker. So I've got 7 locks to make the team. I think Charlie Heck makes the team again as a swing tackle. I think Kendrick Green makes the team as an interior guy who can play guard and a little center for you as well. And then I very, very bubble, the last like sort of final cuts. Said, okay, let's go 10 offensive linemen. I put Nick Broker in there, but I don't feel great about it. I think there's a few guys that could be, but I'll put Broker in there for now. If you're trying to hold me to kind of hold me to a standard here. So that brings us to 26 roster spots left to fill, I think. Boy, I hope my counts are right here. Quarterback takes us to 53. Running back takes us to 46. Let's see. The fullback takes us to 45. 3 tight ends takes us to 42. 6 wide receivers. Yeah, so we've got 26 spots left to fill. So let's do it. On the defensive side of the football, defensive line, locks to make the team. Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter, Danico Autry at defensive end, Foley Fatukasi, and Tim Settle I've got as locks to make it on the interior part of the defensive line. Add Mario Edwards, add Khalil Davis, add Derek Barnett as 3 more, brings us to 8. And then I threw Kurt Heinisch in at the end to give us 9 defensive linemen on the team, takes us down to 17 players left to fill this team out. So that's kind of where I am with the defensive line. That interior of the defensive line is still kind of an issue to me. So there is that. All right, linebacker. I've got Christian Harris. I've got Azeez Al-Shire. And then I will add Henry To'oTo'o and Neville Hewitt as linebackers to the mix as well. So I've got 4 linebackers making the team. Takes us down to 13 spots left. Let's just wipe out the 3 specialists right now. John Weeks, Kaimi Fairbairn, and Tommy Townsend. So we've got 10 defensive backs making the squad. Check that. I've got Jamal Hill making it as well at linebacker. So that takes us down to, we've got 9 defensive backs on the squad. Jamal Hill was my 53rd guy making the team, the 6th-round pick out of Oregon. As far as defensive backs go, I've got locks to make it at cornerback, Derek Stingley Jr. and Kamari Lassiter. Non-locks who do make it at cornerback, Jeff Okudah, CJ Henderson, Mike Ford. And then I've got safety, Jalen Petrie, Jimmy Ward, Kalen Bullock, and then throw in MJ Stewart in the mix. I think that's 53. I think. Boy, I sure hope I got my count right here, but I think that's 53 total. Anyways, I know I kind of rushed through the defense, but I'm tired. I want to wrap up. That's my 53-man roster that I've got. So I'm planting my flag in the 53-man before anybody else does. Thoughts on that? Send them to houmailbag@gmail.com, houmailbag@gmail.com. So we are now into the summer months. We will do a mailbag on Tuesday. We will have plenty of Texans content for you coming up over the next several weeks. I expect training camp to start sometime in the middle of July. The Hall of Fame game pushes everything up by at least a week. So I would expect sometime around the July 16th, 17th, 18th in there for training camp to begin, which is awesome. It's like getting Christmas a week to 10 days earlier for those that celebrate Christmas. Whatever holiday it is you celebrate that involves getting gifts, push it up by 10 days. That's how this feels. So appreciate all you for tuning in. houmailbag@gmail.com to send me an email. A reminder, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast as well by clicking that subscribe button. So for Anthony Irwin, my producer who gets this podcast out to all of you, I'm Sean Pendergast. We're out of time. Have a great weekend. We will see all of you next Tuesday for the Utopia Football Podcast.